Today we're going to be performing an oil change on a 2012 Mercedes-Benz C250. This is the 1.8 turbocharged gas 4-cylinder. Come around to the front here. We're going to lift the hood. The great thing about the late model Mercedes is that you can put the hoods into service position without any latches by just pushing it all the way up and straight up just like this. That way it's nice and neat and out of your way. I've laid out here everything that I'm going to go ahead and use for this. So I'll start with the oil. We're using Mobil 1. This is approved for most Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Audi and Porsche. It's the European formula W40. The other way you can tell this is actually approved for Mercedes-Benz is on the back side on the label. You'll actually see Mercedes listed here with the Mercedes number of 229.3. That's their spec. It's a little bit of a pain to find that. It's not really in the manual, but you should look for it on the back of the bottle. I have a 5-quart bottle as well as a 1-quart bottle. This particular C250 holds completely bone dry, I think 1.8 quarts. It's probably going to take a little over 5 quarts today. I'm sorry, not 1.8 quarts, 5.8 quarts. It's probably going to take a little over 5 quarts today, so that's why I've got this extra quart here as well. In addition, we have a brand new factory filter from Mercedes-Benz. We'll zoom in on that so you can get a picture of what the part number actually is. So this is a new filter along with the O-rings, and I just opt to get Mercedes because why screw around with anything cheaper to save yourself 10 bucks. The tools we're going to have today are actually relatively simple. We need one ratchet with an extension. This is a 27mm socket. I have a universal swivel on it with a very short extension. So you don't actually have to have the swivel. The extension is actually going to be necessary, and you'll see why. You see where the filter is located. We're also going to be using an oil extractor. This is called the Topsider. It actually works pretty good. There are definitely some nuances to it. One of the things I'll tell you right from the very start is it's incredibly important when you assemble this to make sure you get the seals just right. If the seals aren't just right, it will leak and you'll be very frustrated when you're trying to pull the oil out. So really important to take your time with those. I use a little water or a little spit on the seals to get even a little bit tighter. And it might take you 1 or 2 tries to actually get to do it. But if you can get the seals right, it actually works really good, and it should pull virtually all the oil out of this, even better than draining it with the drain plug in about 15 or 20 minutes. And that while that's being drained, it'll give us the opportunity to actually replace the air intake filter. And what you'll need for that is a T27 bit or wrench. In this case, I have that on a ratchet driver. So there's 3 screws that you'll see that we'll be taking apart from there. And just one simple slotted screwdriver to get the intake hose off. So we'll be doing that while the oil is actually draining. I like to use these latex gloves. These are powder free. I'll get you close up on the brand on these. You can get those on Amazon. They work fantastic. They're really hardy. They don't rip easily. They're great for working on cars. And then cleanup's just throwing them away in the trash. All right, so we're going to get started. So the first things we want to do in preparation for our oil change and before we use the oil extractor is we want to take the dipstick out, and we want to remove, or not remove, but we want to loosen quite a bit the oil filter. That way there's no vacuum created in the motor. It allows the oil to come out. It gets sucked out a lot easier. So we're going to start with, on this particular model Mercedes, a lot of Mercedes are like this. This piece right here is nothing more than, it just snaps on. You literally grab it from the front right here and you just give it a nice little tug like that, and it pops off. So we want to remove that and move this out of the way. Next, you're going to want to pull our dipstick. You're going to want to keep this dipstick handy because we're going to have to measure the length of the dipstick. It's going to help us determine how far down we put the oil extractor tube. So I'm just going to wipe this off. We're going to set it to the side for right now. What's not so great on these 1.8 turbocharged 4-cylinders in these late model Mercedes is Mercedes opted to put the oil filter in the back as opposed to in the front on some of the earlier models. And that makes it a little bit of a pain to get to. But you can identify this, and we'll zoom in here a little bit. There should be an orange ring around it that says turbo. It has like a large nut on top. So this is where we're going to use your 27mm socket. your extension, and in this case I actually have a U-joint on here to help me get this off. So we're going to go ahead and loosen this. It should loosen pretty easy. It does. I want to go pretty slow because it's actually going to be draining a little bit as we start pulling it out. That can probably be done by hand at this point. Get this guy out of here. It's a little tight in here. That's why the universal joint helps a little bit. The other thing I should have pointed out is that we do need to take the oil cap off at this point. Again, we're just kind of breaking the seal. We're just going to set this over to the side again, so we have straight air flowing through when we go to do our extraction. So I'm just going to continue unscrewing this by hand. And if you haven't done this before, there's actually a cartridge inside here, an oil filter cartridge. So you don't want to just yank it out all at once. And in fact, what I like to do is just let this sit here and drain up about 1/2 inch. And that seal's good and broken here. So we're going to go ahead and start the oil extraction, and while the oil is being extracted through the topsider, because that's going to take about 15, maybe even 20 minutes to get all the oil out of the engine, we can then be working on putting the new cartridge in here. So for now, I'm just going to go ahead and leave that. Okay, so today we're going to be using the topsider fluid extraction system. Pretty simple system. This is available. I actually got this on Amazon. It's a little bit pricey. I think it was about 60 bucks for shipping. But considering what it does and the time it'll save, hopefully it'll be worth the price. This is a pump that comes with it. You actually get tubing, and I've already put the tubing together, but you'll actually get tubing. You get a clamp that goes onto the tube. There's two different IDs of tube. There's this clear, a little bit softer plastic tube that initially goes into the can. Then there's a little harder tube. This is what's going to go down your dipstick. And then there's this clamp off that you use to clamp this off to make a seal so that you can actually create a vacuum. And we'll demonstrate what that actually looks like. Here's an important thing when you're extracting oil out of your engine is the motor oil actually has to be fairly warm. Not scalding hot, but warm. So in the case of this car, we drove it around the block, let it run for about 10 minutes, and we got that oil viscosity nice and warm. The reason we want to do that is because it'll help extract it out a lot easier. If that oil's too hot, like if we had been driving it around for a couple of hours, it would be too warm. And one of the problems with this particular unit is it'll start to almost melt this plastic and make it really, really soft. And then the suction then collapses it, and then the unit ends up not working. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind is the oil needs to be warm but not scalding hot to do a good extraction. It comes with various seals. In this case, this is the small seal that goes into this particular lid. We'll go right here. And we're actually going to use a little bit of water to make a nice tight seal. Some people recommend using oil. I don't recommend using oil because oil will deteriorate those seals over time. Water won't. It's a larger seal. This is going to go on the pump end right here. And again, before we completely assemble this, we're going to go ahead and wet those seals so that we can get a nice tight seal. The actual unit itself is nice. It's all metal. The only real disadvantage is you can't really see how much oil is actually going into it, like some of the clearer ones. But that's okay. You can always lift it up and weigh it. It also has two caps for when you're finished. You can store your used oil in here and take it to the recycling place. So that's all good. So we're going to be a little primitive here and just literally use spit to make this seal, just to get it a little bit moist. Again, I'd rather use moisture from water or spit than to use oil. Oil will deteriorate the seal over time, the gasket over time. So the key is getting this on here and getting a nice tight seal to it. Without that, the extractor just isn't going to work that well. You may end up getting frustrated because you'll be out here for hours pumping away trying to get 5 quarts of oil out. Some Mercedes have up to 8 or 9 quarts of oil, so you can imagine that's even longer. So same thing here. Just going to moisten the outside of that seal. I'm going to go ahead and put this on. Make sure it's nice and tight Got a nice tight seal on both ends here. So I think we're pretty good there. Okay, now that we have our pump on and we have our hose cap on, the next thing we're going to want to do is clamp off this hose so that we can create a vacuum inside the can. So it's just a nice little pinch off like that. Set this over to the side like that. And they recommend 30 to 40 pumps. Now what I will tell you that is you got to hold this pretty steady, otherwise that pump comes off of those screws. So before we put the tube down the dipstick on the top sider, we're going to want to measure the length of our dipstick to this plastic tubing, and we're going to want to mark that. And in this case, we're going to mark it with some blue tape. And the reason we're going to do this is because you want to stick this down your dipstick and maybe go a half an inch or an inch further than the tape mark. The reason is because if you just start feeding it down there and you don't quite know how far you're supposed to be going down with it, you do run into the possibility of the tube actually reaching down into the oil pan and actually making a U-turn and coming back up. And then that way you're not going to get all your oil. So you want to avoid this by making sure that you know about how far it needs to go down. So you're going to feed it into your you'll feed it down into the dipstick, and you'll go down about another half inch or an inch. You might find resistance, but you may not. But at least you'll have some confidence that you're basically at the bottom of your oil pan with your extraction tube. Put it up inside here. And then we're going to feed this harder plastic, more rigid plastic tube down inside the dipstick tube. And again, we've marked where the dipstick goes. We're going to go all the way down. We're pushing it down. Oh, I feel resistance right there. So I said about a half inch, but quite frankly, it's gone down about another 3 inches. But I definitely feel the bottom of the pan and some resistance. So that's actually pretty interesting. Once it's in, we simply just release this, and the oil starts to flow. If you want. This is specific for this particular 2012 C250. Inside the filter is your cartridge with some new O-rings, and we're going to want to install the new O-rings before we want to put the cartridge back in. That other guy. They're in a little plastic bag right here. One of the tools that we'll use to help us get the O-rings on is a dental pick. You don't have to use a dental pick, but I find that it actually works pretty good. So we'll set this aside for right now. We're going to go ahead and get the cartridge, the old cartridge out. Remember, we already unscrewed it. Now it's just a matter of finessing it around this wiring harness and this vacuum line. And since we open it up, most of the oil has probably come off of it. Bring it over here to our work area, which just happens to be a dirty rag right here. So you got to give this a fairly good tug to kind of just pull off that cartridge. And then what you're going to find is you got O-rings here, and you have an O-ring here, and you have an O-ring right here. So there's 3 O-rings. I'm going to remove the old ones first. This is the smaller one. Just going to get in there, pick that open. I'm not too concerned about ruining them because we have new ones. It's the other reason I like to buy factory filters, because I know the O-rings are the right gauge and the right diameter. The aftermarkets are probably okay, but why risk it? The main one that sits up here. Put that guy down. All right, get a new main one on there. Make sure he's seated all the way up. In the process of doing this, especially when you have the gloves on, you're going to get some oil on the new O-rings, and that's great because you want those to be lubricated when you put them back on. And we go to the next size up here. And just do this by hand. Don't be using any tools. You don't want to nick these or break them. Again, just putting them on is going to keep them lubricated, or get them lubricated just by the process of putting them back on. So that's nice and back on again. Just check them, make sure they're seated properly, make sure it's going around, that's all seated properly. They've got oil on them, so they're going to screw back in nicely. Put our new cartridge on. don't know for sure, but I don't think there's an orientation. I think the cartridge is exactly the same on both sides. So that just pops on like that. Just give it a nice little shove in. It's ready to put back in. So we'll come back over to the car. I should mention that while we've been doing this, the oil is still extracting out of the car. Like again, I said it takes 15 or 20 minutes for that actually to happen. In fact, we got a little bit of a kink in our hose here. I want to make sure we're okay with that. And it feels like there's quite a bit of oil in there, so it's still working its way back up. This will start making a gurgling sound when you're empty. So we'll show what that actually looks like. But right now we're going to put the cartridge back in. Real simple process. Line it up. Monkey around a little bit with that wiring harness and this vacuum hose here. I'm going to tighten it down by hand. And then we're going to snug it up with our 27mm ratchet. We're going to get it nice and snug. We don't want to go crazy. There's probably a torque spec that Mercedes has. I'm not going to worry about that. All right, well, got a new filter in. Oil's coming out. I'm going to pinch this off and give it a couple more pumps. Create a little bit more of a vacuum. Let that off. So as you can see, I'm getting a little bit of that hose pinching because of the warm oil. This oil is actually not that warm, so you're just going to be aware of that. So one of the things I like to do while the oil is draining, and again I said it takes 15 or 20 minutes to fully suck all that oil out, is go ahead and check the intake filter. This is a T27 bit inside of a ratchet handle. Actually not using the ratchet here, but... And there's 3 screws. There's 3 T27 screws. There's 2 in the back, and there's 1 in the front. They're pretty easy to get to, which is nice. And there's 1 right here. And you're going to need a flathead screwdriver to get in here and remove this clamp, this intake clamp here. I'm just going to loosen it up a little bit. Take it off to the side. That just will come out like this. There's a little bit of a seal. There we go. Rotate this up, we can actually take the filter out here. It's stuck in there a little bit. There we go. We got the filter box, and we got a filter. Looks like we're due for a new filter in this guy. One of the things you're going to find is when you take your air filter out is there's going to be a certain amount of sand and debris and bugs and junk in here. So it's a good idea to go ahead and vacuum that out. So we've gone ahead and removed the filter housing off because it just makes it easier to vacuum. It's actually pretty easy to do. Just give it a wiggle and a tug while you're holding on this one end. It's also going to make it easier to put the new filter back in. You'll notice on the bottom here there's a couple clamps that are actually going to go into like these little arms that are down here. So it's going to be a lot easier when this thing's not clamped down to kind of line it up with that. Let's see how it lines up. Make sure that wiring harness is out of the way. There we go. Just going to hand start these torque screws. Make sure it's sealed all the way around. All right, get the intake hose. We're just gonna slip that back on. It goes on just like this. Needs a little wiggling. There you go, just like that. And then we'll tighten that back up with a the slotted screwdriver. Hear this gurgling a little bit, which means that we're getting to the end of the oil right now. Now, some people like to actually run the extractor down through the oil filter, but there's really no need to go do that because that's draining to the bottom of the pan as it is. So I can clamp this off and give it a couple more pumps. I don't think that we're going to get much more out of it, but we'll just check it out. Yeah. We're really just getting bubbly air. So again, because the hose goes all the way down to the very bottom of the pan, and the drain plug sits on the bottom or the side, it still will leave up to almost a half quart with a drain plug, believe it or not. Doesn't sound like that's practical, but I've seen demonstrations where they show that it actually can do that. This actually will go to the very bottom and suck out pretty much all the oil. You might have 2 or 3 ounces left. That's going to be normal for any oil change. So this particular 2012 C250 holds, I believe it's 5.8 quarts of oil. Well, you're never going to get all the oil out of there, so it's probably going to take about a little over 5, maybe 5.5 quarts. So I'm going to go ahead and start with just putting in this full 5 quarts to begin with, and then we'll fire the motor up, let it run, and then we'll check it. But I suspect we're going to have to add at least another half quart or so, but we'll see how that goes. So get a funnel, otherwise you're going to make a giant mess. Okay, we've emptied a full 5 quarts in, and I'll go ahead and put the return to oil cap back on, clean up any residue oil we might find here on the motor, make sure we return the dipstick. We're going to go ahead and fire it up, and we'll be checking for any leaks. We don't have to check under the car because we didn't mess around with anything, but in particular around the filter, make sure we don't have any leaks, make sure everything sounds good. Let it run for a little bit, and then we'll come back and check the oil. So after letting the car sit for a few minutes, let the oil settle back down, we checked the oil and determined that it needed an additional quart. We went ahead and put that in. So I'll go ahead and tighten down the oil filling cap and just check the dipstick one last time, make sure we're good. Looks like we're really nice, perfect, nice, good, clean oil. Makes me feel good. But actually, before I return this, one thing I do want to do is put the cover back on. It goes on a little easier when you don't have the dipstick in. So the cover literally just snaps right back on. Just line it up really right here, and you kind of just give it a little bump back here, a little bump back there, a little tap in the front. It's really that simple. Wipe that all down. Return your dipstick. I always like to make sure I didn't leave any tools inside the bonnet, or little paper towels or rags. Give it a little wipe down, and you're good. It's that simple. The whole process, including the air filter, should take you about 40-45 minutes. It really doesn't take much longer than that. And again, that used oil is already stored in the topsider. I can recap that, take it to my recycler at my convenience. That's it. I hope this helps folks out. It's really not that hard to do.